That song is called Like a Stone. But it's by Audio Slave. And that song rang me so many bells for me that I bought the whole album because I wanted to see where these guys were going. I was just really intrigued. I liked the album, but I didn't find the same itch throughout the whole album that I heard in this song. There is this itch, this desire to enter heaven. Not exactly sure what that looks like, but I know that I want it. That's the feeling I get. Chris Cornell, the author of that song and lead singer of the band, said that it's a song about concentrating on the afterlife you would hope for rather than the normal monotheistic approach. That is, you work really hard all your life to be a good person and a moral person and fair and generous, and then you go to hell anyway. That's his view of what the ordinary, normal, monotheistic approach is. That's an amazing statement. I'd love to sit down with Chris Cornell for a couple of weeks and just talk about all the stuff that comes up in that song and what he said there. Because I think it's so many parts of the modern person. Now, there's an angst in Gen Y. There is a desire for something, but we just don't know what it is. There's a desire to connect, not just with each other, but with something greater than ourselves. Add to that the natural dissatisfaction with traditional, organised religions, and you have an increased interest in spirituality, the occult, and even, ironically, in atheism. Richard Dawkins has tapped into that angst, and people are reaching for it because they desire an answer of some form. They will become disillusioned with the God delusion and move on in time. However, it doesn't just strike a chord with us, it strikes a chord with Augustine. Augustine was a fellow who lived about 1600 years ago or so, and he said that people were built with a God-shaped hole in their heart. And they will fill that hole with whatever comes to hand, with money, with booze, with sex, with family, with drugs, career, schooling, and even religion. But only God will satisfy. Now, we take this for granted, but it's a real surprise for people when they find out that those things don't do it. That those things that they have doesn't fill this gap. As Christians, we know the answer to the problems that the world faces. The answer has a name, and his name is Jesus. Jesus himself told the disciples to go out and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that's Matthew 28. And that's the last point we're going to look at in our short study of the church. You see, if you've caught up over the past 4 weeks, the church is the place, well, it's actually the church is the people whom God has gathered around himself and his Son by his Spirit to hear his word and serve him by serving one another. As such, the church isn't the place primarily for non-Christians. We keep trying to get you to bring friends to church, but it's not primarily the place for evangelism. The church is where God's people gather. I'm not saying that we don't let anyone in, that we sort of quiz them as they walk in the doors and now, can you tick this box and this box and this box? No. What I'm saying though is that the church is when God's people come together. Now, there will be non-Christians who come into our meetings for a variety of reasons. In fact, Paul, when he wrote... That's a Peter, I think. Paul, when he wrote the New Testament, not the New Testament, he wrote a letter to 1 Corinthians, expects non-Christians to come to church. In 1 Corinthians 14:23, he says, "Therefore, if the whole church assembles together, and all are speaking in languages or tongues, and people come in, will they not say that you're out of your minds? But if all are prophesying, and some unbeliever comes in, he is convinced by all, and is judged by all." Listen to this. He says, as a result of coming to church, he will fall down on his face and worship God, proclaiming God is really among you. So Paul not only expects that non-Christians will come into church, but that they should use that they should make that an opportunity for non-Christians to hear about Jesus. But when it comes to evangelism, how do we do that? Now, you heard the two readings where Peter says Always be ready to give a reason for the hope you have. And Paul tells us to make the most of every opportunity. Sorry, that's the NIV. It's sort of similar in the NRSV, where it says, be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Interestingly enough, people think that bringing someone to church is evangelism. There are largely two types of... You're awake? That's good. Two types of churches. There is the attractional church, which is traditionally the way church was done in Western society, where the church became the centre of everything. You put on big events. You had Billy Graham come and visit. You had talented, gifted speakers who explained the Bible, and basically you just tried to drag everyone into church so that they would come to hear about Jesus. Missional church is at the other extreme end of that sort of spectrum. Missional church is when you go out. Instead of saying that you guys bring people in, we send you out. I speak, but I spend more of my time training you so that you then go and tell other people about Jesus in various and different ways. I've just shortened the video by about a minute. Had some really cool graphics. I'll link it on my Facebook page so you can look at it later. Now, I love it when my week intersects with my church preaching so nicely. This week I was at a training event for people who've been recently ordained. At the training event we were talking about evangelism, and in particular what used to happen in Sydney, but also that's where I saw this video that you can't see, but you can see it on my wall. Back in the 1950s, everyone went to church. Like, everyone went to church. Even if it was just to drop their kids off at Sunday school, everyone went to church. The mission strategy of the time was people came to church, and so we gospeled them in church, we taught their children, and if they didn't come to church, we would then try to make relationships with the people who dropped their kids off by having Sunday school picnics and things that were integrating the children's ministries with the rest of life. Everything to do with life was tied to the church. When you were born, you got baptised at the church. When you grew up and got married, you would get married in the church. And when you die, you would be farewell from this mortal coil in the church. The church was connected to everything so strongly that in World War I, and even to some extent in World War II, when someone was killed overseas, it was the clergyman who had to go around and knock on the door and say, "I'm sorry, but your husband was killed." Not a good job to have, but it showed that they expected that everyone knew the local clergyman. Now, that's not what it's like today. Things have changed. See, we're talking about a completely different society then. We're talking about a society that did not have the motor car. We're talking about a society that was pre-TV, let alone internet and iPhones. There was nothing, I know this sounds bad, but there was nothing to do on Sundays.